Hello and welcome to Module 4 C-STARS Technical Training. This video will cover the functionality completed during the IEP meeting. On the day of the IEP meeting, the first page that you'll complete is the cover page. You'll want to make sure that all of the demographic information at the top is correct, that the areas of eligibility are correct, and then you're going to scroll down to the middle of the page where it says Meeting Date Selection, New Meeting Date. You're going to click on the calendar icon and you're going to select the date in the blue circle and then click Create Meeting. Create Meeting will drop the date down into the retrieve meeting date, and it will also populate all of your participants for that meeting. You'll notice that it populated both of our parents. If you have one parent attend the IEP meeting and not the other, you would simply delete their signature date and then select the parent that is participating in the meeting. Next, you'll notice we have our FCPS staff participants. You'll notice that it auto-populated our principal designee, our general education teacher, and our speech pathologist. The only participant that it didn't auto-populate is ourselves, so you're going to want to click on the drop-down arrow and select your name. Then you're going to want to hit save. Up in the top left-hand corner, if your save is ever green, that means that there is new information that you've entered onto a page and that it is not saved yet. And actually, C-STARS won't allow you to navigate to another page until you hit save. So we're going to click on save. And our save then grays out, so we know that everything is safe on that page, and we can move to another part of the page. One thing I want to point out, if parents choose to bring somebody else to the meeting, whether it be an advocate, whether it be a family member, whoever it may be, in order to add that participant, you would simply click Add next to Other Participants. You would add their name, their title, and then give them a signature date. And then because we entered new information, we're going to go back up and save. Now, how you navigate the IEP from here is completely up to you as a case manager. I'm going to be working tab by tab for training purposes today. So the next tab we are going to review is going to be the transition tab. Any secondary teachers will need to complete Module 5, which is how to complete the transition plan. So if everyone would please click Include the Transition Plan. If your student in training does not have an anticipated graduation year, please enter one. Next, it's asking us to enter the highest diploma. We're going to select the drop-down arrow and select Standard. And then we have to answer the question, does the IEP team need to consider credit accommodations to graduate with standard diploma? We're going to say no. And then we're going to scroll down. And we have to answer the question, did the student participate in the development of their transition plan? We are going to select the drop-down arrow and 30 days and select Principal's Designee Confirmation, signifying that the student has not yet participated in the development of their transition plan. Then we're going to go up and hit Save up in the top left-hand corner. And that is all we are going to do for the transition plan today. Next, we're going to move to the Plop tab. The Plop page is a page where you're going to want to, at the very top, document the date of the meeting, the purpose of the meeting, and an eligibility statement about the student's most recent eligibility. Discussions regarding other components of the IEP should not be documented on the Plop page, but rather documented on the prior written notice. And we will discuss what that looks like when we review and go over how to complete the prior written notice. You'll notice that my save is in the top left-hand corner is green, so I'm going to hit save. The next section of the plot page is where the IEP team can document their proposal for evaluations. For training purposes today, we are going to answer the questions by clicking on the drop-down arrow. Has the IEP team recommended any evaluations during the meeting? We are going to say no. And then, does the evaluator need to consider the student's EL status and or mode of communication? Again, we are going to say no. Below are several statements that the IEP team might need to consider and discuss during the IEP meeting. These statements are the AIM Virginia statement, the ESY statement, additional location statements, LEP statements, medical statements, and other statements. Let's look at the medical statements. For any of the statements, in order to access them, you would just click on the little arrow next to the name of the statement, and then click on the drop-down arrow below it. These are pre-filled statements that are available for the IEP team to use. And in order to use them, you would simply click on the statement. It would drop it down into the text box below, and then you would modify it as necessary. So for instance, I put a statement in that Caddy has a medical diagnosis of ADHD for which she does not take medication. We're going to click on Save up in the top left-hand corner to make sure that all of our information that we've entered is saved and that we can move on to the next page. The next page that we are going to discuss is the Needs and Accommodations tab. When you click on the Needs and Accommodations tab during the meeting, you should see the goals that you've drafted and proposed and sent home to parents 3 to 5 business days ahead of time. In order to review these goals, you would simply click on the blue arrow next to the name of the area of need, and then again on the blue arrow next to the name of the goal. Then you would review the goals that are being proposed with the IEP team and parents, and then you would simply move to the next section of the Needs and Accommodations tab. In order to access the possible curriculum, classroom, accommodations, and modifications, you'll simply click on the arrow next to the title, and it will reveal all of the possible curriculum and classroom accommodations and modifications. Notice that the accommodations and modifications are in alphabetical order, except when they get down to other. You'll also notice that there are some accommodations and modifications that have described below behind the accommodation or modification. What this means is, for instance, I'm going to select flexible schedule, frequent breaks for Caddy, but I have to describe what that looks like for Caddy. So in order to do that, I scroll further down and I select other accommodations and modifications, and then I type in the text box what frequent breaks looks like for Caddy. So anytime you select an accommodation such as frequent breaks that says describe below, you're going to want to describe that accommodation below in the text field and what that accommodation looks like for your student. The other thing I want to point out is the other box right above the other accommodations and modifications checkbox. This other is, when you click on the drop-down arrow, says interpreting. This is for our students who are deaf and hard of hearing and who require a sign language interpreter. This is not for a language interpreter such as Spanish, Urdu, or Farsi, but rather a sign language interpreter for our deaf and hard of hearing students. So right now, the only accommodation I have selected is frequent breaks. I would like all of you to also select frequent breaks and then describe below, and then select 3 other accommodations and modifications. I'm going to select graphic organizers. I'm also going to select calculator, the top one, and I'm also going to select read aloud, read to student upon request or read on demand. And then I'm going to hit save. The next tab that we are going to navigate to is the assessment tab. My student is in 4th grade, so I have the elementary and middle school assessment tab. Your student in training might be a secondary student, so you might have the high school assessment tab. I'm going to try to describe both tabs so that anybody who has a secondary student is able to complete the high school tab as well. When you click on the elementary and middle school assessment tab, it's automatically going to select the current grade that the student is in and next year's grade. For training purposes today, we're going to unselect next year's grade and only select this grade that the student is currently in. Also, for training purposes, we're going to select SOLs. Then we are going to scroll down and select all of the current grade SOLs. So for instance, for me, I'm going to select all of the 4th grade SOLs. Then I'm going to scroll a little bit further down, and I have to acknowledge whether or not the student will participate in those SOLs with or without accommodations. How do I do that? I click on the drop-down arrow, and I select, for training purposes, I'd like you to select that the student will participate with accommodations. And then we're going to hit save up in the top left-hand corner. Below the accommodations statement is the online accommodations statement. This is a statement, one of 4 statements that we would like you to read word for word to your parents. Your parents require the use of an interpreter. We would like you to read the statement in English first and then have the interpreter translate it into the language of the parents. So you would read this entire statement to the parents, and then you would answer the question, does the IEP team need to consider the online SOL audio accommodations? I'm going to say yes. Next, we have 2 questions that we have to answer. The first one being, does the IEP team need to consider the read aloud audio accommodation on the reading SOL? Since I selected the read aloud accommodation on the accommodations and modifications tab, I'm going to select yes. Then the next question is, does the IEP team need to consider the calculator accommodation? So I'm going to select yes here as well. Then I'm going to click save. And what you'll notice is when I click save, it'll activate the read aloud criteria button and the calculator criteria button. In order to access those criteria, you would click on the button. It's going to open up a new window for you. And you're going to want to work through the page, the criteria form, answering all of the questions. The first one is answered for us. Does the student have a current IEP or is one being developed? Yes. Does the student have a visual impairment, including blindness, that visually prevents the student from accessing print in any format, including Braille or alternate digital file? We are going to say no. Does the student have a reading disability that severely limits or prevents him or her from decoding text at any level of difficulty, as determined by a diagnostic tool or instrument? We are going to select yes, and then hit save. The next section of questions is in response to number 3 up above. The first one being, are the students' demonstrated weaknesses in decoding addressed in the IEP goals or 504 plan? We are going to select yes, because we do have a decoding goal for CADI that we've proposed. 3B, does the student demonstrate adequate comprehension? We're going to also say yes. 3C, does the student have access to the general education curriculum? We are going to say yes. 3D, does the student use accommodations for the identified weakness in decoding? Again, we're going to say yes for training purposes. In order to answer section 3, you're going to want to hit save. But before we do that, I want to point out that currently it says that our student does not meet the required criteria for the read aloud audio accommodation on the English Reading SOL assessment. When we hit save, you'll notice that that checkbox moves up and it now says that the student meets the required criteria for the read aloud audio accommodation on the English Reading SOL. Please provide a justification statement for the read aloud audio accommodation in the box below. And then once you've typed in your justification statement, you're going to hit save. After you've hit save, you're going to red X out in the top right-hand corner. And now we're going to move on to the calculator criteria. Notice that it answers the first statement for us, that the use of a calculator or arithmetic table on sections of the Standards of Learning Mathematics assessment in which a calculator or arithmetic table is not allowed. You'll notice that there is a general eligibility statement. You'll want to read this to your parents. It also tells you what grade level or SOL they will be taking and using the calculator for. In our case, it is the 4th grade math SOL. As we scroll down, we have to enter the name of the calculator. You'll notice that below there is a checklist of all of the calculators that meet the criteria for VDOE. So you can certainly access that checklist by clicking on that link if you would like. Just like the read aloud criteria, we also have to have a justification statement for the calculator criteria. But before we do that, we have to answer these questions. Does the student have a current IEP that documents or will document the student's disability and need for the calculator indicated above? We're going to say yes. Number 2, as a result of a specific disability, has the student routinely used this specific calculator in the classroom to perform calculations? We're going to say yes. If you said no, you would have to provide a justification statement below in the text field. Next, we have to answer question 3. Does the student need to use a calculator with accessibility features such as large display, large button, audio to access the SOL test? We are going to say no. If you did say yes, you would have to provide a justification statement in the text field below. Question number 4. Does the student need to use a calculator with additional mathematical capabilities to access the SOL? We are going to say no. If you did say yes, again, you would have to provide a justification statement in the text field below. Question number 5. Does the student need to use a calculator, arithmetic table, or machines to access the section of the SOL mathematics test in which a calculator is not allowed? SOL mathematics tests for grades 3 through 7. We're going to say no. Again, if you said yes, you would provide a justification statement. The second section, calculator accommodation decision. You'll notice, just like the read aloud accommodation criteria, it's saying that our student does not meet the criteria currently. We're going to hit save. And now you'll notice that it moves that checkbox up above and that our student does meet the criteria for the calculator. You're going to red X out after you make sure that your save is grayed. It will take you back to the assessment tab. And we're going to scroll down and we're going to look at the additional state or division-wide assessments section. We're going to click on the drop-down arrow, and there are 2 statements in there. The first statement is that the student is exempt from additional state and or division-wide assessments. The second statement is that the student will participate in any additional state or division-wide assessments if required based on a student's grade level, using classroom testing accommodations, if required and allowed by test. Most times you are going to be selecting the second statement for your high incidence population. When you would select the first statement is possibly for your low incidence students when they are exempt from certain evaluations because they are not appropriate evaluations for them. If you do exempt your students, you would then list the types of assessments that you're exempting them from. And to do that, you would simply add a line of assessment. The top one is for the SOLs, and the bottom one is for any other type of assessments that you would have to type in yourself. Okay. You'll notice that I've entered these 2 lines, but I said that the student will participate in any state or division-wide assessments. So in order to get rid of these 2 lines, I'm going to click in the checkbox below the X, and it's going to delete those 2 lines. We're going to scroll all the way down to the bottom of the page. You're going to provide your parents with the diploma options and select that the parents have received the diploma option and requirements information. Next, we're going to hit Save. And we're going to move on to the Testing Accommodations tab. The chart that you see on the Testing Accommodations tab is a combination of the accommodations that you've selected on the Classroom Accommodations and Modifications tab, plus the assessments that you selected on the E&M Assessment tab. You'll also notice that it automatically checks the accommodations for the classroom testing. So you have to go through each one of the assessments that you've selected and determine whether or not this accommodation is appropriate for that SOL or assessment. So go ahead and select a couple of accommodations for your assessments. If you see that it's grayed out and it says not applicable, it's because that accommodation is not available for that assessment or that SOL. So once you've selected a couple accommodations for your assessments, you're going to want to hit Save up in the top left-hand corner. And then we're going to move along to the LRE tab. Just like the online audio accommodation statement, we also want you to read the least restrictive environment statements to your parents. Again, if your parents require an interpreter, please read the statements to them in English first and then have the interpreter translate them. But as you read them, you're going to click on the checkbox next to them, and you'll notice that it highlights them, letting you know that you've read that statement to your parents. We're going to hit Save, and then we're going to scroll down to where it says General Education Participation. We always want to think about where our students, our special education students, are accessing the general education environment. So we want to document that here on the LRE tab. You'll notice up above the text box, there are bullets that give you ideas and suggestions on possibilities of where in a student's day they might be accessing the general education environment. How you document access to the general education environment in this box is up to you. You can write incomplete sentences, you can bullet. It truly is up to you. There is no prescribed way about how to document access to the general education setting. You'll notice that I bulleted where my student is accessing the general education environment. Once you've done that, you're going to hit Save. And you're going to move to the Services tab. The Services tab is where you document the services that the student is receiving. There are different ways of how you can navigate this page. Some people navigate this page by adding all of the additional or related services first, if the student receives those services, and then documents the primary service. Some people document the primary service first and then move down to documenting the additional or related services. Just note that a student is in school for 30 hours a week or 120 hours a month. So you can't go over 30 hours a week or 120 hours a month. How do you add a service? I'm going to start with the primary service by clicking on Add. It's going to give me a line to add information to. I'm going to click on the drop-down arrow underneath Service, and it's going to give me a list of potential services that my student could receive. I'm going to select LD services. After I've documented the name of the service, I need to document the hours of the service. First, special education in general education setting hours. And then next, special education setting only hours. Then I have to document the frequency of those hours. So how often are those hours being delivered and is the student receiving them? I click on the drop-down arrow and it allows me to select month or week. Please follow the guidance of how your school documents the frequency of their services. Oftentimes, related service providers and secondary folks like to document by month and elementary school by week. But again, follow the guidance of your lead teacher and or department chair. I'm going to select week. And then I'm going to, before I begin filling in the dates, I'm going to hit save up in the top left-hand corner. What you'll notice will happen is that those dates will auto-populate for me, and then I don't have to fill them in manually. You'll notice that those dates are auto-populated in. If you begin to fill in the dates manually, you would have to continue and finish filling in the dates manually. Next, we are going to document an additional or related service, and we're going to click on Add. Again, we have to select the type of service, and I'm going to select Speech Language Services. And I have to enter the number of hours of special education in general education setting, and then special education setting only, and then the frequency. And as I stated earlier, oftentimes related service providers like to document by month. So I'm going to hit save. And again, it's going to auto-populate those dates for me. What those dates mean is the IEP and these services that we're proposing are going to begin on August 24th, 2020. And then they are going to end on the last day of school, June 11th, 2021. Once you've documented all of your services, the placement tab at the top has the continuum of services. So it starts at the least restrictive, number 1, general education classes, and it gets more restrictive as it moves down the list. Most of you will always be navigating between 1 and 2. If you're starting to talk about or parents mention public separate day school, so anything 3 below, you should have other members from either your administration or from central office there to help guide those conversations. So most of your IEP meetings, you will be navigating between 1 and 2. So I'm going to consider and select general education classes and special education classes, because if you remember on the services tab, I had hours in the general education setting and in the special education setting only. Next, I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to enter the placement rationale and hit save. Below the placement rationale is the proposed school assignment. In order to add a proposed school assignment, I'm going to click on the Add button. It's going to give me a line to enter data. Like I said, up at the top, where most of you will be navigating between general education classes and special education classes, most of your IEPs will be navigating this first column, FCPS school. Any conversations that you have with contract schools or alternative schools, you will have other individuals at the meeting there to help guide this proposed school assignment and navigate these drop-down windows. So we are going to click on the drop-down arrow underneath FCPS school, and we're going to select any elementary school. It doesn't really matter for training. And then we're going to hit save. Save again auto-populates those dates for me. You'll notice that it's the start of the school year and the end of the school year, just like it is on the services page. I'm going to scroll further down and you'll see the placement disclaimer. So right now we have the online audio statement, the LRE statement, and now we have the placement disclaimer. So this is our third statement that we want you to read in English to your parents. And again, if they require an interpreter, English first, and then allow the interpreter to translate in the language of the parents. Next, we have to answer, does the student require special transportation? We're going to click on the drop-down arrow, and we're going to say no for training purposes. The last question we have to answer, the last section we have to answer is regarding extended school year services. The question is, does the student require ESY services in order to receive a free and appropriate public education, or FAPE? We're going to click on the drop-down arrow, and it gives you three statements. The first one, the IEP team determined that the student does not require ESY services. The second one, the IEP team determined the student requires ESY services. And the third, the IEP team will determine and or address ESY services at a later date. You must select a statement that is appropriate for the discussion that you've had around ESY services. For me, in training purposes, I'm going to select that the student does not require ESY services. We're going to hit save. Once we've answered the extended school year services question, we're going to actually bypass the ESY tab and move to the agenda tab. Many people ask why the agenda is at the end of the IEP meeting. How you use the agenda is up to you. You can certainly use it at the beginning of the meeting. Oftentimes schools print this and laminate it and provide it to all of the participants and parents so that they have it in front of them as they're going through the meeting. Or notice that there's a check all button at the top. Please don't use that button. We want you to go through each statement on the agenda and acknowledge that it was discussed and addressed during this IEP meeting. We're going to hit save.
Beginning August 2020, FCPS has worked with the vendor to embed the prior written notice into the IEP. As you can see, the prior written notice tab now resides between the agenda and the consent tab. Use the information that's provided during the procedural training on prior written notice writing to complete this form. So you'll complete each box and press save. Then you move on to the consent tab.
You'll notice at the top is the prior notice of IEP and placement decision. This is our fourth and last statement that we would like you to read to your parents. So read this statement to your parents. Let them know that they can, if they have any questions, they can certainly call Due Process and Eligibility at 571-423-4470. Once you've read the prior notice of IEP and placement decision to your parents, you're going to check the box that indicates that you've read it to them and provides them a line on the hard copy to initial. The next section is where we indicate, did we give our secondary students and parents the age of majority brochure? The age of majority brochure must be given to parents and students preceding a student's 17th birthday before they turn 18. This is to inform parents and students that upon turning 18, the signature that we seek for consent is not the parents, but rather the students. So my student is in 4th grade, so I didn't need to give the age of majority brochure, but I did give the parents the diploma options and the extended school year information. We're going to hit save. We're going to scroll down, and you'll notice that it says parent consent. Before we ask for parents' consent, we must validate this IEP. What validate does is it checks the IEP for any errors that there might be. So anything that you might have missed or did not enter, it will catch that and it lets us know where those errors are so that we can go and correct them. This is where you might want to explain to your parents that you have to validate this IEP and let them know that you're just making sure that there are no errors, that you didn't miss anything or forget to document something, and then go about validating the IEP by clicking Validate this IEP button at the top. It's going to give you this window letting you know that it's checking all of those pages of the IEP for any errors. And it looks like I have a couple. Don't be surprised or shocked at the number of validation errors that you have. It is quite normal for beginning C-STARS users to have quite a list of validation errors, but as you become more familiar with the program, that list of validation errors will become less and less. While it's generating the IEP on the left-hand side, I want to point out the information that's documented on the right-hand side. You'll notice that it tells us the view. So all of these validation errors are in the student's IEP, on which tab the validation error is located, and then the description of the validation error. So for instance, number 1 says, were post-secondary services discussed? If yes, document discussion on the present level of performance, page 309. I'm going to click on number 1. It takes me to the transition tab, and it highlights the post-secondary services section of the transition tab. I'm going to click on the drop-down arrow, and I'm going to select no and hit save. You'll notice that when I hit save, a little green floppy disk appears next to number 1. That's your indication that number 1 has been corrected. You're going to work through your list. You'll notice that I've corrected all of my validation errors. Something to note, when you correct your errors, it does not remove those errors from the list. Your indication that they've been corrected, again, is that green floppy disk. So I'm going to click on close. Next, I'm going to click on the hold button. The hold button has 2 features. It'll validate the IEP once again and make sure that there are no errors. If there aren't any errors, it will generate a PDF of the entire IEP. So I'm going to click on hold. You'll notice that it gives me a window that says the IEP is now on hold. So I didn't have any errors anymore. And I'm going to click OK. It's going to give me that window that's letting me know that it's generating that PDF for me. Once the PDF is generated, you will want to print the entire document because we provide our parents the entire proposal for them to review, possibly take home, but we provide our parents the full proposal and not just the consent page. So you would print this PDF and then you would red X out and it'll take you back to the consent tab. But what you'll notice is that hold button has changed to a release button. Why does it do that? It does that because we provide our parents a full IEP proposal. They might choose to provide us consent right there at the meeting. Many of our parents do. But they also might choose to take the IEP home and review it again at their leisure to digest it more and then send it back to us with their consent. If parents choose to take the IEP home, the IEP remains on hold until we get that signed IEP back. So the only person that has the ability to release it is the case manager. So we're going to release the IEP. It's going to tell me that it's released, and it changes back to hold. And then we're going to indicate parents' consent. For training purposes, we are going to say that the parents agreed and provide the signature date as the date in the blue circle. So we are going to say for training purposes that our parents agreed with the IEP, they loved it, they loved our proposal, and we're going to select the signature date as the date in the blue circle and hit save. Next, we are going to make the IEP current. This is the point of no return. It means that when we click the Make Current button, the IEP that we are proposing here becomes the current IEP. And any changes or modifications to this IEP would have to be done through an addendum. So we're going to click on Make Current. It's going to generate a new window for us. And basically all of that means is, do we really want to make this IEP current? We are going to type in yes and click Continue. It's going to let me know to turn off the projector. We can close out this window by clicking on the X up in the top right-hand corner because we don't need a new PDF. We already have a signed IEP. What I do want you to note is at the top, all of the buttons that we had available to us have disappeared, and the only button that is available and active to us is the print preview button. You'll also notice that the status of the IEP has changed from draft to current. So this is now the current IEP for our student. Parents have been provided a copy of their signed IEP and are on their way home. We are going to red X out of the IEP, and it's going to take us back to our folders view. If you'll notice, it still's indicating on our folders view that our IEP is in draft form. In order to change that, we're going to go up to the refresh button and we're going to click on refresh. And that draft IEP changes into a current IEP. And then we're going to go to the workflow tab. We need to close the workflow by clicking on the top workflow link. We're going to look at line number 2. And did we make the IEP current, and are we wanting to exit the workflow? We're going to click on the calendar and select the date in the blue circle. We're going to select a decision that yes, it was completed, and we're going to click on save. You'll notice that it automatically populated the last date for us next to stop. And so we have closed the workflow. So we can red X out of this window and red X out of this window. But you'll notice that our student is still underneath the annual IEP process. So I'm going to click on refresh. And our student then moves up underneath our case management list. We know now that there's a current IEP by the current IEP icon. We know that there are progress reports generated. And we know that the workflow is closed because the student is up underneath the case management list.